Welcome back to BBN After Dark. We have our final position player preview here. We are going to talk pitchers next week, but we finish our position players here with center field. And Bernie, I believe this is our smallest position in terms of amount of players. I think center field, one of the more difficult positions to play. You know, typically you're only going to have one, maximum two center fielders on a team, whereas, you know, other positions you may have three or four of them who can play that position. Typically, if you can play center, that's where you're going to play. So I think, you know, very high ceiling at this position, some very promising prospects at this position, and a lot of athletes. So I'm excited to get right into it. And just like always, we have split these players into four categories. We have our superstars, our veterans, our depth, and then our up-and-comers. Superstars are the top of the food chain, best of the best. Our veterans are our guys who are top team starters opening day. Our depth is guys who are maybe going to be second team guys, maybe we're going to be on the edge of the top team, and then our final up-and-comers category is some of our top prospects and rookies. So let's go ahead and get right into it, Bernie, with our superstars. And we've got two here. Let's go ahead and start with Mac Floyd. Arguably the best player in the Bears, the BWL MVP of the 16-18U League. I mean, not sure that there's much to say about Mac. He was our first high school player ever to hit 500 last year. We've never had a high school player hit over 500 in the regular season. Mac was able to accomplish that. He had one of the best extra base hit to walk rates that we've ever had, or extra base strikeout rates that we've ever had. And a monster year. I mean, Bernie, you know, one of the best in the Bears right now, so I'm not sure what else there's to say. But what were your thoughts on Mac Floyd's 2023, and what kind of steps forward do you see him taking in 2024?
Yeah, you know, there's not much to say about Mac. Look, this is a guy we'll probably talk about, you know, close to every week, you know, at least every week at the bare minimum during the season. But yeah, I expect Mac to have another great year. I know I said this a lot last fall to where the kind of the one knock on Mac is he didn't have the same type of power as maybe like a Brendan Nickerson. But, I mean, I think he showed us that he does have that power in him last fall. You know, he's right there in the home runs and doubles with everybody else. So, I mean, same thing in 2024. He'll have a great high school year, and then he'll come back and hopefully battle over 500 again.
Yeah, not much to say about Mac. Monster. Top three player in the Bears, no doubt. So, yeah. Let's go ahead and move on to another guy who I think at his peak, Bernie, he probably was in that conversation for a top three player in the Bears as well. Last year, a bit of a down year compared to his standards, but still a very productive year all around. And that's Andrew Willeret. I mean, former Rookie of the Year. I don't know if he ever won a full season MVP, but he was definitely a Player of the Month several times. I mean, this guy, it seems like at his best, he is one of the best combinations of power and being able to put the ball in play and walking a lot. You know, he kind of does those three percentages that we talk about: extra base hit rate, strikeout rate, walk rate. He does all three of those things well when he's at his peak. I think last year we saw the power kind of dip down to where he was in 2022. But Bernie, I think this is a guy who, you know, I think we'd be silly to doubt him. I think he had a really dominant BWL season, which kind of gave me some indication that he might be back to that MVP caliber form. But this is a guy, Bernie, I think has one of the highest ceilings in the Bears. What do you make of Andrew Willeret's 2023? Again, a bit of a down year by his standards. You know, extra base hit rate was around 10%, where last year it was close to 20%. It was around 19%. What do you make of his 2023, Bernie? And what do you see as the most likely outcome for Andrew Willeret in 2024?
Yeah, you know, for his 2023, you know, if my memory serves me right, I think most of the struggles came early in the year. You know, I heard a lot of things about his approach was changing at the start of the year. But from what I heard, he got back to it toward the end of the year. You know, looked like the Willeret of old toward the end of the fall. So, I mean, it's very hard to get back to what Willeret used to do because, you know, he's getting older, pitchers get better, and he was so good, you know, last year or 2 years ago. But I think we see something similar, you know, that type of version of him for this 15-year year.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is the BWL really kind of showed me that power's back, you know, and he was hitting some balls in the BWL that were exploding off the bat and were in the air to where maybe not necessarily the home run power he had before. I know he had, you know, I think his first fall with the Bears, he had like 5 to 7 home runs. I'm not sure how many home runs he's going to hit, but I think he's going to get a lot closer to that 30 doubles type season that he's had in the past, where last year he only had 15 doubles. So I think he's going to be closer to 30 than he is to 15 going into the season. And that's even with him playing high school ball for the first half. I think he has a chance to be a real doubles machine for the rest of the season when he comes back. Moving into our veterans tier here, a lot of really good players. Several players I considered potentially being in the superstar tier, Bernie, but decided to put these guys in veterans. And let's go ahead and start with a guy who I think is one of the more, I would say, high floor options on this list. I mean, this is a guy who seems like he's been slow and steady, one of the most solid players in the entire Bears, and that's Fred Smith. I mean, this guy, I think it's more of a case of what are we going to get from him in terms of the ceiling, because I think at Fred's worst, he is one of the most solid players in the Bears. You know he's going to play Gold Glove caliber defense. You know he's always going to give you a good at bat. I think the question marks become the power and then just the consistency of hitting the ball hard. But Bernie, obviously, you've coached this guy for a long time. Now that he's with 18U Floyd full time, I mean, what do you see as kind of the ceiling for Freddie going into 2024? And how did you see his development at the end of 2023?
Yeah, like you said, Freddie's going to be productive for a team no matter what type of weekend he's having, right? He can either be 9 for 10 with a couple doubles in there and having a really good weekend power showing. But even the weekends he goes 1 for 10, there's probably 4 or 5 walks mixed in there. And there's not many weekends he goes 1 for 10. He's probably at least 3 for 10 at the bare minimum. Like you said, he's going to play Gold Glove defense, he's a good base runner. So he'll do everything else right. But again, we've talked about a lot of these type of players to where, around Mac and Brennan used to be guys to not hurt the team, right? You need guys to, step up and maybe be like a third or fourth wheel for that team. And that could definitely be Freddie, right? He's got the potential to do it. And that outfield with Mac and Freddie out there, and then Rowe or Clayton, I mean, whoever you put out there, has got to be among the best defensive outfields in the Bears.
Yeah, 100%. Mac and Freddie, I mean, these are 2 Platinum Glove candidates in the past. I know Freddie at least once was a Defender of the Month. But, I mean, yeah, this outfield's going to be fantastic. I think Freddie had some really good moments in the BWL, took some good at-bats off of, guys like Elliott and Reese Payne, who are obviously top pitchers. I think Fred showed a lot of kind of maturity at the plate where maybe he was a little bit over-anxious last fall. So I think there's a lot of potential for Freddie to have maybe a little bit of a bigger role on Floyd rather than just a bottom-of-the-order, kind of role player going into 2024. Next up, Bernie, we have Lucas Closter. This guy, is kind of the opposite of Fred. At Lucas's worst, he is a guy who looks like he is really struggling to help your baseball team. And at his best, he looks like he's one of the best players in the Bears. I think this is going to be a real test of a year in terms of what Lucas is made of. Is he this super high ceiling, super low floor, boomer bust type player? Or is he going to really take that step forward into that superstar role? I think this is a guy with all the tools, all the athleticism, all the hard work. I think the question is just about, his focus and his day in and day out approach. So Bernie, I think this is a guy you look at as definitely a candidate to be the best hitter on this 11U Floyd team. And I think the question is, what's he going to be on the bad weekends? Is he going to be a 0 on the bad weekends, or is he still going to be really solid? And I think that's kind of the question for me with Lucas Closter. Bernie, I wanted to ask you about his defense. I think you've seen a little bit more of Lucas defensively than I have. Is he a guy who's a plus defender in the outfield, or do you see him more of an offensive center fielder, first of all?
Yeah, I would say that he is probably offensive first, but he's the same type of defender I think that he is at the plate. What I mean is, look, this kid is insanely athletic. He'll make some plays that nobody else can make. Only guys like Mac or maybe like Aaron Nolan make. But there'll be some balls that are definitely catchable that maybe there's a lack of focus that he just drops it. But yeah, probably definitely an offensive first fielder, but he can make plays that no one else can at the same time.
Yeah, and I think Lucas with the bat, Bernie, this is a guy who, again, there were several months, several weekends where he was the best hitter on the team. I don't know if you can necessarily say he is the best hitter on the team right now, but definitely has that potential. Where do you see Lucas in terms of what you expect to get from him offensively in 2024?
Yeah, as we'll find out here down the road of the show, I expect this guy to be at worst a top 3 hitter for this team. I think there is a very realistic chance, not even a long shot, a very realistic chance that he is the best hitter on this 11U team over the summer.
Yeah, 100%. I could definitely see that. I like this kid a lot. I think he's shown a lot of work ethic this winter, and and previous winters. He's always been a hard worker. But I do think this is a big, make or break year for Lucas in terms of what is his true level of play going to be. And a guy who I think is a pretty good comparison to Lucas in terms of an older version is Ben Lillard, who's the next player we're going to talk about here. I mean, this is kind of that example of a super athletic, boomer bust type player. Ben, he hit probably one of the furthest balls of the year last year. Hit a ball out of Ellisville 1, which is an absolute mammoth field. And then he had some weekends where he was hitless, in 8 at-bats. So I think Ben, nobody can question the athleticism. Nobody can question the ceiling. But I think what you can question is the, consistency of Ben Lillard. And then, like you said, Bernie, I think Ben has a very similar thing defensively where he'll make an unbelievable catch, he'll run through a fence and hold on to the ball, and then he'll drop a routine fly ball. So I think Ben is a really good comparison to Lucas, if Lucas kind of stays in that boomer bust category. But what do you see for Ben in 2024, Bernie? Do you think that, because I think he had a very solid year last year. I think going back to a couple years ago, Ben Lillard was, a very poor hitter in terms of his numbers. And then last year he put up a very solid season, a 104 OPS plus, so slightly above average on that Dalton team. And although week in and week out, it didn't feel like a 104 OPS plus. It felt like some weekends he was a beast and some weekends he wasn't there. But over the course of the season, he had a really solid year. What do you see from Ben Lillard going into 2024, Bernie? Do you see kind of the same thing as 2023? Or do you see a step forward or even a step backward for Ben Lillard in 2024?
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and act like I've, watched a ton of in-game Ben Lillard at-bats. But just from looking at stats, right, like you said, this guy was, to call it, frankly, a bad hitter a couple years ago. And you just look at his stats, right, he's on that upward trend. He's been in free swing every month, so I have no reason to believe that he's going to take a step backwards. But I just think that, we'll continue to get more good weekends than bad weekends, right? I think he'll continue to limit the bad weekends more and more each year.
Yeah, and another guy I wanted to talk about here is Aaron Noel, who is a guy who I think coming into 2023, we kind of talked about in the same light, where he's that super athletic boomer bust type. But I think the version of Aaron Noel we got in 2023 was a lot more consistent, but a little bit less of those big pop-off moments, right? I don't believe he hit a home run. Oh, he did hit one inside the park home run in 2023. This is a guy who I think has over-the-fence home run power. I think this is a guy who has the potential to be one of the top hitters on this Floyd team. But I do think that he kind of sacrificed some of that ceiling to raise his floor last year, Bernie. Because you really didn't see him strike out near as much. You didn't see him take these just terrible at-bats, but I do think he took some away from that ceiling level play. So, Bernie, I know you've always been a big Aaron Noel fan. What did you make of his 2023 in terms of a little bit more consistent, but maybe a little less explosive? And what do you make of that as he transitions into 2024?
Yeah, I've always been a fan of the guys like Aaron Noel, like a Lucas Closer, right? Those guys you kind of see as boomer bust guys. But I think just last year for Aaron, I believe it was his first time playing every single weekend with the top team. I could be wrong on that. I believe it was, though. And I think maybe there was just a fear of getting taken out of the game. If I strike out, I'm going to get put on the bench. So I think he took a little bit off his swing, right, and sacrificed that power. Put the ball in play. He's still a great defender out there. But I think if you get Aaron fully brought into the approach, this guy is going to hit some bombs this year.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, the defense, Aaron's defense really was on a just upward trajectory all year. One thing I really got onto Aaron in April and May was about just letting balls drop that maybe he couldn't catch, but I'd love to see him go for it. Go for that diving play, and if you miss it, it is what it is, but at least you went for it. I think he had several opportunities in the first couple months of the season that he could have made a hero play, and then didn't, and he kept it in front of him. And some coaches may like that, but I wouldn't. I want to see Aaron go and make superstar plays, and I think down toward the tail end of the season, I remember in September, he made one of the best plays I've seen a center fielder make, period. He was going over his head and dove into the gap, and it was just a beautiful play. And I think Aaron's got that type of potential to be a Matt Floyd-esque center fielder. And if he can combine that with maybe a little bit more of that 2022 high ceiling that he had when he first joined the Bears in his first full season, I think you could see Aaron very quickly turn into one of the best players at this age. So, yeah, I'm excited to see what we get from Aaron in 2024. Another guy that at this team that I'm very excited for in 2024 is Jack Kester, our reigning Rookie of the Year in the fall. Just came in and went on an absolute blaze, had several home runs in the fall in a very short time, and ended up with a 130 OPS plus. Now, that's some between Bell and Floyd, but monster offensive numbers. And defensively, he is like a second center fielder out there. I mean, going into the season, I think you say Aaron's the center fielder, Jack's probably in right, but, I mean, this guy is in the center field preview for a reason. He's a center fielder playing right. You know, we talked about some of the guys who play second base that are actually shortstops. It's like having two center fielders out there when Jack Kester's out there. Bernie, this is a guy who I think has joined the Bears and immediately adapted the approach, immediately adapted the work ethic, and obviously is completely all in. What did you think about Jack, Bernie, in 2023? And given his, the steps we see people take after their first Bear winner, what do you expect from Jack in 2024?
Yeah, obviously, like you said, this guy came in, was all bought in, he had a great fall. And again, how I talk about these guys a lot on the show is, what does the offseason look like for them? And there's zero question around Jack Kester in my mind. Fully bought in. I think he shows up every time. He gives you his best effort, practice or anything he's at. Like you said, he's kind of profiled out as like a boom or bust type hitter, but we saw a lot more good than bad weekends last fall. I think we see the same thing. It's hard. It is tough to say he gets better because he had a great year, but I think he could do it.
Yeah, and you mentioned that boomer bust style, Bernie, and I think I agree with you in terms of the profile, but last fall, there really wasn't a whole lot of busting. I mean, he had more extra base hits than he had strikeouts. I do think he had a lot of swing and misses, but typically he was never out of an at-bat, and I think he only takes a step forward. I think, if you look at his BWL production, I think it wasn't necessarily there, but he was punished by the field. I mean, obviously, Jack's profile, kind of like Vince Dalton, he pulls fly balls, right? That's his thing. And that's not really super conducive to the BWL. I think Jack had a ton of hard hit balls that kind of got robbed in BWL called outs that are going a long way in the regular season. So I'm ready for Jack to just absolutely take over and be a top 3 hitter for this Floyd team going into 2024. Finally, Bernie, the last player here on the veterans category is going to be another rookie in Hunter Finley. This is a guy who I would say right now is probably a little bit defensive first. I think this guy's going to be a plus, if not very plus, defender in the outfield. And I do think he's going to have a much better offensive year in his first full season with the Bears than he did in kind of his cup of coffee in the fall. First, Bernie, what have you seen from Hunter Finley on the defensive side? I know we've talked about before this guy was not a natural center fielder when he joined the Bears. Gets put into center field, maybe a little bit of a rocky start as he learned the position, but at the end of the fall and definitely in the winter, this guy's just looked really, really good in center field. So let's start with his defense, Bernie. What have you seen from Hunter Finley on the defensive side this winter?
Yeah, like you said, last fall I joined the team. He was actually a first baseman. But just by looking at him, right, seeing how fast he was, I was like, all right, I'm going to put this kid in center field and see what happens. I remember the very first day, actually the very first game he played in the fall, he was playing center. It was like the third or fourth inning. And he made a sliding play on his knees. And I was like, okay, that's all I needed to see to really ride this kid out because this kid's very athletic. There were some rough spots early in the fall where he definitely missed some balls that could have got caught. But then I believe it was our last weekend, maybe 2 weeks before the end of the year, he made 3 plays in one game that my team has just never had made before. Like we've never had another outfielder make those plays. So of course that gives you a lot of hope going into the winter. And his workout has been great this winter. No questions there. He's looked great in practice. I think he looks like by far the best outfielder in practice. So I don't see a reason why. My hopes for this guy are Gold Glove. Maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I think he's going to be really close to that conversation this year.
Yeah, and for me, I feel like that team, Bernie, even back when I was in charge of that age, we've never really had a good center fielder, at least a guy that could play there every inning. Obviously you could stick guys kind of out of position in center, but we've never had a true center fielder at that age that could just go out there and make plays. And I think Hunter Finley is going to be a real plus for that team defensively and kind of can, completely turn the tide for that outfield. And then on the other side of it, Bernie, offensively, I think, this is a guy who maybe a little timid in his first fall at the plate. He had a super high walk rate. He's one of those guys who walked a ton and struck out a ton. We've said it several times on the show. Typically, if you see a walk and strikeout rate above 25%, that screams passive. And I think that does kind of describe what Hunter Finley was in the fall. But this winter, I think he's really started to kind of buy into that approach of being aggressive and swinging hard. And maybe not yet in the games, Bernie, but definitely in the cage, we're starting to see that work pay off. I think Hunter Finley's going to have a much improved offensive season. And he doesn't necessarily have to be top 5 on the team to be a productive player because of what he's going to bring to the base pass, the defense, and the pitching staff. If he's just the 7th best hitter on this team, I think it's a huge win for the roster. But what do you think, Bernie? What do you think is the most realistic outcome for Fish, and where do you see as the ceiling for Fish Finley going into 2024?
Yeah, then this was another guy that in Winter League, he started off in his first couple of bats. I thought he was timid. I thought he was just straight over matched by some of these guys. But as the winter went on, last couple weeks I thought he took some really good at bats. He had a couple hard ground balls that even though they're outs, like okay, this guy's getting more confident, right? He's starting to swing hard. And if I'm looking realistically with 2024, I think in 2023 he batted 190 with like a 480 on base. It was something close to that. He doesn't have to be a top 5 hitter, but if we end this year in Fish bats, 300 with a another 450, 480 on base season, I think that's a very good year for him, right? This guy, when he gets on base, he's also lethal on the bases. I mean, he'll still second at least, if not third. Very quick kid, but I think that's realistically, if he ends up there, you're like, this was a very good year for Hunter.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think this guy's only going to get better as he gets bigger and stronger. But yeah, I think he's going to, he's kind of thrown to the wolves a little bit. I think if he were at a different age, potentially he'd have a little bit more time to kind of mature into that role. He's getting thrown straight into it, and I think, from what I've seen from Hunter, I think he's going to respond really positively to it and be a big impact player this year. Let's go ahead and move on to the depth category. And I'll tell you what, the rest of every player we're going to talk about, Bernie, all super, super athletic with, kind of varying degrees of on-the-field success so far in their careers, but all of whom are very, very athletic, which makes this kind of, the rest of this position preview really exciting. Let's go ahead and start with a guy, Bernie, that I feel like I've been kind of the, conductor of the train for this guy. I feel like he was a guy who I honestly didn't really like that much when he joined. I questioned his work ethic. I questioned his talent. But as I've seen more of him, I just seem to like more and more. And that's Joey Haddican. This guy spent time on all 3 teams last year. He will probably spend time on multiple teams going into this season, including on Floyd. But this is a guy that I just feel like, kind of like Hunter Finley, is going to provide so much on the bases and in the outfield. And take enough good at bats to where you're not really worried about him at the plate, that he's going to be a productive player. I'm not sure how high Joey Haddican's ceiling is, but there were times last year when he was on the Bell team that I would watch Bell's game, and he looked by far the most polished player on the field. Not necessarily the best player, not necessarily the highest ceiling, not necessarily the most talented, but the most polished player, where he looked natural on fly balls. He looked like he knew what he was doing in every base running situation. He looked like he was never taking, crazy swings or taking balls right down the middle. So I feel like there's a lot of a high floor to Joey Haddican. The question for me, Bernie, is that kind of the role he's resigned to for the rest of his Bear career? In your opinion, Bernie, do you see Joey Haddican being, once again, obviously he's going to take a step forward in terms of just more experience, but do you see as him being kind of a career role player, or what do you see as the ceiling for Joey Haddican in 2024?
Yeah, for the purpose of just 2024, I do think he's going to kind of be that role type of player when he does end up with Floyd. But if you're looking years ahead, look, I think this kid just needs to get bigger and stronger. If I look at this guy, if you put up Joey next to someone maybe like Parker Ells, right, there's a difference there, right? I think that Joey needs to make that up over the course of this summer, next fall, next offseason, whatever it may be, because I think the talent's there. We just need to add a little meat to those bones, right? Get the exit velocity up, and he could get there. But for purpose 2024, if he's on Floyd, I think it is going to be another role player type thing.
Yeah, Bernie, you mentioned obviously he's got to get bigger in terms of stronger, but he's actually, I feel like he's grown like 8 inches since he joined the Bears. I mean, he's gone from being one of the smallest guys on the field to a guy who's kind of standing tall with everybody. So I think, he's got the natural size. It's just about getting that size from the gym, that I 100% agree. That's kind of his path, Bernie, to extend that ceiling. But a really solid year last year, and I'm excited to see what kind of production he puts up in 2024. Next player here, Bernie, is a guy that I feel like, again, I don't know how much I liked him when he first joined. He kind of just struck me as a really low ceiling, really kind of not necessarily lazy, but like just did the bare minimum. Where the more I've seen him, the more I've liked him, and that's Caden McBride. I mean, this guy just seems like his work ethic has just kind of stepped up as the winter's gone on. I feel like he kind of was just feeling out the Bears over his first couple practices. And then as everybody else worked, or not necessarily as everybody else, but as the practices got harder, he went harder. And it got to the end of the winter where he was one of the hardest workers in the outfield. He had some really productive at-bats in some live arm I was watching the other day. He had some nice moments in the BWL. So I think this guy has kind of turned from a guy who I think was pretty forgettable to a guy who I think is pretty exciting going into 2024. And even if he does start the year on that Latrania team, I think he has the potential to kind of work his way up the ranks in 2024. Bernie, I know you get to see this guy practice a lot. What have been your thoughts about Connor McBride this winter?
Yeah, funny story kind of about McBride a little bit. We were probably halfway through last fall. I go around and watch a lot of the other teams during the fall throughout the day, and I walked up to the training game, and this kid was batting leadoff, and I was like, John, who is this kid? Like, I've never seen this guy before. I feel like he's like, oh, that's McBride. And this fall he's kind of made me remember that because I think he's worked very hard, like you said, especially like down the stretch of the winter. One of the hardest workers we've had. He's out there diving for balls, working hard. But for me to get better, I think he's kind of in that same situation I just said about Joey, where he has to get bigger and stronger from the gym. If he ever wants to make that jump to being one of the top Driscoll guys or a Floyd guy, he has to get bigger and stronger. But for 2024, again, if he's leadoff guy with Latrania, I think if you're John, you're very happy about it. And if you're Jeff, he's on your roster, I think you're also very happy about it.
Yeah, and I think Caden's one of those guys who's going to outplay his size, where I think he's got more power than you would think from looking at him, and I think he's got, he's going to be a better hitter than what you'd think from just looking at him. And on top of that, I think he's got the potential to play Gold Glove caliber defense in the outfield. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see what we get from Caden McBride this year. Another guy, Bernie, who I think has been historically a very good defender in the outfield is David Morrison. I think this guy, went through a little bit of an injury this winter, so did miss some time in terms of training. But I think the potential's always been there. He has a good exit velocity. He has really good athleticism, good speed in the outfield. And this is a guy who, we had a category last week we called post-hype guys. I think David Morrison kind of fits into that because I think there was a time where he was kind of looked at as a up-and-coming player with some promise, and I think people are starting to forget about him with all the exciting names at 15U. So, Bernie, what do you think about David Morrison? Do you see him as more of this guy who's just kind of going through the motions right now and is kind of dead in the water, or do you see this injury, if he comes back, do you see him kind of getting back that hype that he had maybe last offseason?
Yeah, I know the injury, but I'm not really going to take a side on that right now. What I will say, I think right now Dave still has a lot of chances to prove that, the hype can come back, right? I think he has the opportunity to prove that he's still a hard worker, right? He's willing to put in the work to get back to his former, hype that he had. I don't think it's dead yet. I think that he does have the chance, this summer, even next fall or winter when we start back up winter training, right? He still has the ability to prove that he's still a hard worker, right? He's still willing to put in the work to get there.
Yeah, and this next guy who's definitely been putting in the work is Will Diekman. This guy, one of the most impactful defenders in the entire Bears last year. I mean, Jeff Driscoll even said that Will was one of the kind of catalysts to that Driscoll success because not only did he make all the easy plays in center field, he was going out and getting balls that, kind of like you said with Hunter Finley, Bernie, balls that Jeff had never had caught before. Will was going out and making those catches, getting outs that Jeff had never gotten before. And I think, Jeff sees really highly of this guy. I didn't really, kind of like Caden and some of the other guys we talked about, I didn't really think much of Will Diekman. I liked him as a kid, but I didn't really think much of him as a baseball player. But this winter really has kind of changed my mind, and kind of the end of last fall as well, when he was really coming along as a defender. This guy, I think, really overperformed my expectations in the BWL. There was a time where Kennedy was having this guy bat in the middle of the order in big RBI spots, and that was kind of a shock to me, and he was producing for the most part. So I think Will definitely a glove first guy, but I do think he showed some potential with the bat, Bernie, that maybe he's not just a glove first guy. He's a guy who can do it on both sides of the ball. What are your thoughts on Will Diekman, Bernie? I think he's had a good offseason. Where do you see him in 2024?
Yeah, Will's probably, I I'll say I don't pick favorites, but probably a top, probably 5, 6 favorite kid at that age. Great kid, works exceptionally hard. He's nice to everybody else. And like you said, his defense has always been good. We've known that for a while now. But like I said, the BWL, I show up to a game, and he was batting like 4 or 5, something like that, right in the middle of the order. And I saw him go up to bat, and I was sitting there right next to Kennedy. I was like, Kennedy, Will's batting 4? I was like, I thought he couldn't hit. And then Will smoked the ball, and I was like, okay, maybe we're onto something here. Maybe this kid can hit. So I think for 2024, I believe last year he basically batted like 9th or 10th for Driscoll and was a center fielder almost every game. If you're looking for a big step forward, I think that if he ends the year or ends the summer batting leadoff and being a center fielder, I think it's a great step forward for him. And, he's on the cusp of maybe making a Floyd roster in the fall or next spring.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. Another guy, Bernie, who I would kind of put in that, post-hype sleeper type player is a guy like Tommy DeClue. This is a guy who I think when he was a rookie or maybe even his second season, he kind of had some buzz as a prospect. I actually think he was on Dalton for a time during his rookie season. I feel like in the last year he's kind of disappeared a bit, but I do think this winter he's kind of proved a little bit more of that hunger, or maybe he's always had it and I just hadn't seen it, but this winter specifically, I feel like I've seen Tommy DeClue kind of take that next step forward in his work ethic, and I think he's due for a pretty good year. Again, I didn't really hear much about him last year, Bernie. I don't know. I know you liked Tommy a lot as a kid. I don't know if maybe you were a little bit closer to what Tommy did on the field, but I feel like he went from a guy who was some buzz as a prospect to a guy who I really didn't hear much about in 2023. But this winter, I think he's been very solid, and I think he's kind of set himself up to be one of the key players for that Burn team, and I think he's got the potential to really excel in that role. What did you think about Tommy's 2023, Bernie? Maybe you have a little bit more insight than I do, but going into 2024, what do you got from Tommy DeClue?
Yeah, for 2023, I could be wrong, but I do not believe he started the year as center fielder. He was a corner outfielder. And kind of proved that, he was the best outfielder on the team. He is the best defender. And offensively, again, he started the year as like the 8 or 9, like bottom of the order guy. And then there were stretches where he batted leadoff over the course, like toward the end of the summer. And then kind of once Cole Miller joined, he was taken back out of his leadoff spot. He kind of fell down the order a little bit. He was batting like 5 or 6. But there was still a lot of improvement there. Like you say, he's worked very hard this offseason. I think, if you just talk to Tommy or see Tommy, it kind of gives you that vibe of, too cool to work hard at practice. But he is a grinder at practice. And, again, like the top of the order for that 60 bird team is going to be hard because with Cole Miller and Sam Downs being there. But maybe if Tommy does it well enough, you could see it go Tommy, Cole, Sam, or, however that order goes. But I think he's definitely going to be a top – I'm not going to say top 2 or 3 hitter on the team, but easily a top 5, maybe at worst 6 hitter on this team.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for Tommy to have a nice bounce back year. Another guy who I think maybe one of the most, this offseason was the first time I've been able to work with every single age from 11 to 18U. I didn't get to see much of the youth prep guys, but from 11 to 18U, I got to work with every single age in some way. And maybe one of the most surprising guys for me in terms of work ethic was Avi Patel. This is a guy who, again, I didn't really think much about. I kind of saw him as one of just the guys, at practice. He was one of the guys who showed up and was one of the bottom guys, and that's kind of how I saw him for the first, 4 or 5 weeks of running his practice. But by the end, man, this guy really proved himself as one of the hardest workers, one of the guys who was most willing to dive and most willing to fire the ball on a line, and was a guy who honestly, man, was really, really impressing me by the end of the winter, and a guy who I think, the bat's probably the most questionable part of his game, but a guy who I think is going to have the most surprising season of anybody in 2024. Bernie, I know you kind of had the similar thought of being surprised on Avi in terms of his work ethic, but what do you see as Avi's kind of path for 2024?
Yeah, when Avi joined the Bears, I remember he wore a white T-shirt with a white pair of pants and his green hat. And I was talking to JT about this kid, and he was like, well, he's basically a PO from what I know. He can't really hit, and he's not really a good defender anywhere, but he will throw strikes in the mouth for the most part. And from what I see, it's kind of the opposite from him. If you're looking at just a tools aspect of a player, he hits the ball hard. You can say he swings and misses too much or his launch angle's not good, but he hits the ball hard. He's very athletic. He throws hard. I mean, this guy has a lot of different tools to where, maybe after he's been here about a year and a half now, that these kind of start to come together, and we see a guy that, I think this guy's ceiling, he could be one of the top players on this Burn team. But I think there's also floors down there where he could be, Bobby Orr type guy for this team. I think we'll be somewhere in the middle this year, but and this guy could be a very good player for this team this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think this has been one of the most impressive workers this offseason, and those are the guys who usually succeed, so I'm excited. Let's go ahead and move on here to our final category, the up-and-comers. These are some of our top prospects. I think all three of these guys are rookies as well, but all three have really shown some potential in their first year with the Bears. Let's go ahead and start here with maybe the least polished of these three players, but arguably the highest ceiling of these three players, and that's Jacob Lowry. Bernie, if you would have asked me 4 or 5 months ago what category I'd put Jacob Lowry in, it definitely would have been the depth category before it was the up-and-comers. This is a guy who I definitely thought had potential, but I thought it was going to be much longer time frame. Kind of like we talked about with Garrett Knight, last year. I always knew Garrett Knight was going to be good, but I thought it was going to be a 2-3 year process, not a 8-month process. Jacob Lowry, I thought it was going to take him a lot longer to get to this point, and he's probably not top team ready yet, but he's hit some top team balls, and he's made some top team plays defensively. He's not doing it consistently enough yet to be a top team guy, but he's shown the tools are already there, which is way ahead of where I thought he'd be in his first 6 months with the Bears. So Bernie, I think this guy has really, in terms of stock risers, got to be one of the highest in the Bears this winter. I think this guy's gone from a bottom player on the bottom team to a potential top team player when we're talking about the end of 2024. So give me your thoughts, Bernie, on Jacob Lowry. I think you, and KJ would agree, one of the biggest risers. But what do you see from him as a realistic expectation for 2024?
Yeah, maybe I'm the odd one out here when I say this, but when he kind of joined the Bears, I didn't really view Lowry as the hard worker. Maybe it's because he wasn't in the programs that I work, or I work the outfield a lot, practice at 13U. But since I've seen this guy in the outfield, kid works exceptionally hard, right? Got to be one of the hardest workers out there. And again, he's very fast, right? So he'll make some plays that not many people can make. But especially when he started, he was dropping a lot of balls right at him, right? And that was just being new to the outfield. But the good thing with that is that's not a talent problem. That's just that's a reps thing, right? You get a ton of reps out there, that will go away eventually. And I think that with some time, we could be talking about a guy who is pushing the Gold Glove category for center field defensively.
Yeah, and I didn't mention it, Bernie, but like you said, he started as an infielder. He joined the Bears as a natural infielder, and I do think he kind of got an early reputation of a guy who's maybe a little scared of the ball. A guy who did not look like he fit in the infield, and I think it was KJ's idea to move him to the outfield because of that speed, and I think it looks like a great call right now. I think Jacob has the potential to be one of the best prospect defensive center fielders in the entire Bears, and I think he's a guy who had some balls in the BWL off good pitching that were smoked. I mean, I know he hit a ball off ZZ Garcia that was just a hard ground ball to third base. You expect him to face ZZ Garcia and get blown away in 3 pitches. He swung first pitch, got around on it, and grounded out to third, which to me told me a lot about this guy. I think he's way ahead of the timetable, and I think this guy could be kind of nipping at the heels of some of the Floyd players toward the end of 2024. The next guy here, another 13U Floyd guy, is Owen Weibrecht. Kind of the opposite of Jacob. I think one of the most polished rookies to join the Bears in terms of defensively. This guy has joined the Bears as one of the best defenders in the Bears. From the day he walked in, he's one of the best center fielders in the Bears. There's not a single player in the youth that I think is more smooth in the outfield than Owen Weibrecht. And I think there's very few guys who can say they work harder than Owen Weibrecht. Obviously, the question mark is the bat. I think he's very clearly glove first right now. But I do think he's made some strides with the bat going into 2024. So first of all, Bernie, tell me about Owen Weibrecht. What's your perspective of him as a defender, and how do you think his bat develops into 2024?
Yeah, I think when he joined the Bears, I talk about Lowry, how they can make some plays no one else can, but they'll drop some balls sometimes. I think Weibrecht still kind of did those silly things sometimes when he first joined the Bears. But I haven't seen any of it, down the stretch of this winter. He's got to be, for his age, one of the fastest kids in the Bears, right? Age appropriate. And yeah, with the bat, look, I know that it's been a priority for him this winter to, not be known as a guy who's out there just to play defense, right? He wants to be in the line every day. He wants to take every bat he wants to hit. And just based on the kid I know, right, just Owen as a kid, if he puts his mind to it, it might not be right at the start of the summer or right at the start of the spring, but he will get there at some point. It's just a matter of time for him.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think this guy's put in so much work this offseason. I mean, he's such a great kid that I think defensively, obviously he's going to earn a roster spot based on how good he is defensively, how good he is on the bases. I think he's going to produce on the mound as well. That I think KJ is going to trust the process when it comes to his bat. Because, listen, I know this is something that Rob has said a lot, that to be a good defender and to be a good hitter, it really is the same idea. Look the ball into the glove, look the ball to the bat, swing hard, dive in the outfield. I mean, it really is the same process. So I think, there's very few guys in the Bears that if they really, really work at the highest level, there's very few guys that can't be a good defender or a good hitter if they are the other one, if that makes sense. And like you said, Bernie, not only is he fast in terms of just sprint speed, he's also, he very rarely takes a wrong step. He always is stepping in the right direction. There's a lot of guys who play center field and are just fast. It's another kind of step to be a guy who not only are they fast, but they take the perfect route to the ball every time. And I think Owen is in that category, where only guys like Mac Floyd and even, Aaron Noel, I think are probably, and maybe even Fred Smith, are probably the only guys who kind of fit into that category. So, I'm excited to see Owen Weibrecht this year develop. And then the last guy here, Brian, that we're going to talk about in the center field preview is Parker Wilson. This guy has not yet played a game in a Bear uniform. He joined during the winter, but I think he caught a lot of people's eye. His first couple practices, he's very athletic. Obviously, he is a guy who I think works hard when he's in the building, and is a guy who I think for his size has some pop on the bat. So I think this is a guy who's probably got a higher ceiling than people are giving him credit for. But Bernie, what have you seen from Parker Wilson in his first couple months with the Bears that kind of makes you hopeful for his 2024?
Yeah, again, not like I've seen a bunch of Parker Wilson at bats, but this is my take on him as this type of player, just purely based off his defense. Right, he's an athletic kid, but he's actually I think very polished in the outfield. Like you said, we talk about a lot of these guys like maybe like Lucas Closter or guys like that who will drop some balls, but he really does not do that, right? He's a very good outfielder. He's very athletic out there. Again, for me, this has been his first kind of winter with the Bears. Want to see him buy all the way in and just get bigger. Like if this guy had the body of maybe like an Aaron Noel, I think he'd be just as good as Aaron. I think that'll come with a little bit of time. It's only been one winter. I think that start 2024, he's probably going to be Bell's center fielder, you would think, at the worst case scenario. I think that he'll get a ton of at bats. He'll be a superstar of that team, and then down the road we'll be talking about him as a Floyd guy.
Yeah, I think Aaron Noel's a great comparison for him, Bernie. Obviously I think the peak of that playing style is obviously like that Mac Floyd type. But yeah, I think I could see if Parker Wilson really buckles down and works hard, I could see him being in that Aaron Noel conversation come this time next year. So yeah, I think that's a good call. Let's go ahead and end the show here with our sleepers and breakouts. Again, a sleeper is an under-the-radar player, a guy that we think is going to perform much better than kind of the public perception. A breakout is a guy who's going to go from whatever tier he's in and jump 1 or 2 tiers up. For me, the 5 tiers from top to bottom are superstar, star, starter, role player, and prospect. So let's go ahead and start, Bernie, with your sleeper here at the center field position. You're going to go with a guy that I think, again, when we do the sleepers and breakouts, we make sure we don't have the same answer. This is a guy I let you pick before I picked Bernie that I definitely would have considered for my sleeper in Hunter Finley. Give me your thoughts on Hunter Finley as a sleeper going into 2024.
Yeah, we've already talked about Hunter. One of the hardest workers of the offseason. Had a great offseason for me. And, for the sleeper category, again, I don't think he's going to be a top 3 or 4 hitter on the team. But, last year he batted 190 with a 40 on base. I think if he's a lot closer to maybe 300, 500, averaging on base, that is a huge step in the right direction. He's contributing to a top team. He's going to play Gold Glove defense. I think that he could be, maybe not a flashy player, but he's going to be one of the most productive players on a top team for his role.
Yeah, and I think sleeper is a great, call for him, Bernie, because I think if you're not really in tune with BBN or 12U Burnstill, you probably don't know who Hunter Finley is. And if you do know who he is, you probably don't realize what kind of role he's going to play for 12U Burnstill. So yeah, I think that's a great call, Bernie, from the sleeper. I'm going to go with Caden McBride. I think this guy has really proven to me that he deserves a longer leash before you just write him off. I think, based on his size and his strength, I think it's easy to say, he's just going to be what he is. But I think he's shown in the work ethic department and also just what he's able to do with his current size. I think this guy's got a lot more ceiling than people give him credit for. And whether it's on Latrina or Driscoll, I think this guy's going to perform a lot at a higher level than people are kind of giving him credit for. KJ is not on the show once again here. He is going to go ahead and go with Jacob Lowry as his sleeper. Again, this is a guy who I definitely would have considered for my sleeper if KJ didn't take him. I think this guy's going to be one of the best players on that second 13U team, full stop, and I think he's going to be pushing for that Floyd roster at the end of 2024, and I think if you ask most people, they would be very surprised to hear that as the expectation for Jacob Lowry, so I think that is a great call as a sleeper. For KJ's breakout, he's going to go with Owen Weibrecht. I think that this is a great call in terms of what he's going to give you. I think he's going to be in that role player tier right now, but I think he could very easily jump into the starter tier just by hitting okay. And then if he just hits, a little bit better than okay, you're talking to start talking about him as a star. So yeah, I think that's a great call because Owen's floor is really, really high. Bernie, for you on the breakout category, I think a lot of high ceiling players here, a lot of athletes. So I think there's a lot of candidates. But Bernie, you decided to go with Lucas Closter. I think one of the highest ceilings in the Bears. And if you're putting him as a breakout, Bernie, obviously you kind of expect him to raise that floor. I think at times you could say Lucas was a superstar last year. I think at times you could say he was just a starter. So I think, if you're going into 2024, Bernie, what's your breakout case for Lucas Closter?
Yeah, I think going into 2023, among the coaches, Lucas was kind of guy that when he makes contact, he's going to hit the ball so hard, right? That was kind of his profile. And it was like no matter what Lucas does, you're going to ride him out in the two-hole. This guy can go over 10 to start the year. And we were telling Mac, ride this guy out. And I don't know if he had that bad of a start, but Mac rode him for basically the entire season. And he had a good year, right? He was not probably the best hitter on the team. I think you can maybe argue it, but he probably wasn't. But going into 2024, I think this guy is going to be the best hitter. I think he's going to be the lead for this offense this year. I think he's going to cut down on strikeouts, right? And he's going to massively increase his extra base hits. I think he will lead the team in extra base hits. And yeah, I think he's going to be the main catalyst for that offense.
Yeah, I think that's a great call, Bernie. For me, I'm going to go ahead and go Jack Kester here. I feel like this is kind of the free space on the bingo card. I think this guy's going to be in the MVP race. Definitely when he comes back in June, I think he's going to be an MVP candidate for June. And then in the fall, I think even that he's going to be competing against the high school guys in the Bears. Mac Floyd ages out, Brennan Nixon ages out, and I think that MVP conversation is going to be up for grabs. And I think Jack has just as much a case as anybody else. I think this guy is going to hit double-digit home runs. I think this guy is going to be a top 2 hitter, potentially on this 14U Floyd team that I expect to be very good. I think Jack Kester is going to really establish himself as one of the top players in the Bears, very similar to the path Andrew Willeret took in his first full season with the Bears. That's going to do it here for our center field preview. That is every single position player. We basically have talked about every single player in the Bears that is not youth prep. We will have a youth prep BBN episode coming in the near future, but that's basically every single player in the Bears. So very excited to go through this. This is something I've always wanted to do and really wasn't possible until BBN After Dark. So very excited to get through this. And next week we're going to talk about some pitchers. We're going to talk about some prospects, and we're going to be getting ready for the 2024 season. It's crazy that it's already getting ready to start. But that's going to do it for this episode of BBN After Dark, and we'll talk to you all next time.